This podcast is made possible by you, the supporters of WPLN and WNXP, Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's September 12th, 2025. On this day in 1787, the second draft of the United States Constitution was presented for debate, and the statesman George Mason made a suggestion that turned out to be his line in the sand. Looking at what was and wasn't included so far in the document, and listening to the conversations that were going back and forth on things like whether there should be a right to jury trials in civil cases, Mason suggested there should be a Bill of Rights, like a lot of states already had. That motion was roundly rejected, and ultimately the lack of a Bill of Rights led Mason to leave the convention without signing the Constitution. Later, that November, he laid out his concerns in a Virginia newspaper. He and Patrick Henry actively campaigned for their state to not ratify the Constitution because it didn't clearly list the rights that people could expect. That didn't work. The Constitution was ratified. But Mason's protest and the support that it did garner convinced James Madison that it was a good idea, which is why a few years later, Madison led the charge to retroactively add a Bill of Rights. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee with historical context from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Isn't it wild to imagine a United States without the Bill of Rights? There's no other part of our founding documents that we talk about as much, and chief among them all, at least when it comes to what perpetually comes up in our civic debate, is the First Amendment, the right to free speech. I expect those conversations will be in overdrive for the next little while. As you probably know by now, hard-right activist Charlie Kirk was shot and killed at a university in Utah on Wednesday. Kirk founded Turning Point USA, which organized young people, particularly college students, around ultra-conservative ideals. One of the points the group often comes back to is their idea that mainstream culture tries to silence the speech of people opposed to things like DEI, abortion, or LGBTQ rights. Turning Point's website has group activity suggestions for local chapters to get members fired up about what they characterize as a need to, quote, free the First Amendment. That's quite the turn after decades in which the First Amendment was primarily a rallying point for the left. So many demonstrations of the civil rights movement or the Vietnam-era anti-war movement made use of people's First Amendment rights to gather and protest and speak their minds in public places, no matter how uncomfortable it made the more conservative establishment. The perpetual question that flares up in these discussions is where the line is drawn. When speech evolves into action, how much of that action is protected as a free expression of political opinion? In the 1960s, Congress passed a law outlawing the mutilation of draft cards because young men of draft age were burning theirs to protest the Vietnam War. At that time, the Supreme Court upheld the law, and the idea that destroying that physical tool of the government crossed a line beyond protected speech. Almost 25 years later, in the landmark Texas v. Johnson decision, the Supreme Court ruled that a man could not be prosecuted for burning the American flag as part of a political protest, effectively determining that flag burning could be considered that kind of speech or expression that the First Amendment protects. Now, those are two very different decisions on issues that, in some ways, had a lot of similarities. The pendulum does seem to continually swing in terms of how the First Amendment is interpreted and where its boundaries are set. I hope we can all agree that assassinating a person you do not agree with is absolutely over the line. That is one action that never counts as free expression. It was wrong when the Minnesota House Speaker, Melissa Hortman, a Democrat, was shot and killed in June. It was wrong when Donald Trump was shot at a rally last year. It was wrong when Lincoln and JFK and MLK and RFK were all shot and killed for the things they chose to say in the public sphere. And it was wrong that Charlie Kirk died this week. Every one of those people had the right to speak their mind. Whether their thoughts are wise or well-reasoned or based on facts is another matter. They had a right to speak. And everyone who disagreed with them also had a right to speak about that disagreement. And that's the sphere in which these things are supposed to happen. It's what we've all theoretically agreed to by way of the American Constitution. It's how we participate in a society that is governed by that document. Free speech goes both ways, right? If some doofus over there gets up on a soapbox and says wacko things that I don't agree with, I can also use my free speech to point out what's wrong with what they said. Point, counterpoint. Ideally, we will all bring our best selves to engage in a good faith debate. And when the other guy falls down on that front, we have the right to call them out on their bad behavior. But when someone crosses the bright and clear line, when political disagreement turns to tragedy, we often end up in the kind of moment where the boundaries seem to constrict, where people want to pull in and tighten the limits on speech that they find uncomfortable or distasteful. Shortly after the news of Charlie Kirk's death broke, an administrator at MTSU made a post on social media that basically said he'd drawn the crosshairs on his own chest. It expressed a lack of sympathy for his death, and it should be noted that some of the conservative response to the Minnesota shootings in June, which targeted Democrats, had a similar tone. One person angered by the MTSU employee's post was Tennessee Senator and gubernatorial candidate Marsha Blackburn. She made her own social media post saying that the MTSU administrator should lose her job. And that's exactly what happened. All of this within hours of Charlie Kirk's shooting. There's always a camp that says talking about the political pressures at play should be put on pause after events like Kirk's death to allow a mourning period. It's a natural impulse. And at the same time, it feeds the impulse to restrict others' speech. So it is, again, a First Amendment issue. And that is complicated by the fact that we have seen again and again that before long, something else will happen to capture everyone's attention, to drive the discourse in an entirely different direction. And so there will always be journalists and activists who insist on having the uncomfortable conversation right away, to strike while the iron is hot, to ask what could be done to prevent another death, to ask where accountability should rest. That will always make some folks squirm and wonder if the right to speak out is being taken too far at the wrong moment. But is it really better or more respectful to risk losing the opportunity for honest and raw talk about challenging and important things? So here we are, at another very tense and painful moment for talking about the First Amendment, what it protects and what it doesn't. Maybe we won't do any more in this instance than lash out and fuss and point fingers. A lot of times, that's as far as we all get. But these are the moments when substantive debate might actually happen, and when legal interpretations that can set the tone for the next couple of decades might be set. In just a few minutes, if Nashville needs a lot more housing, where should it be built? That's coming up after the newscast.
We know that local government isn't the only part of your life.
Like the mayor, I know that city government isn't the only thing you're concerned with.
We are still struggling to find affordable housing.
They're taking up at this bus stop.
That's one of the unique challenges with my business.
I'm WPLN's Metro reporter Cynthia Abrams. I'm working to break down topics like transit, housing, and local government to make sure that when you are thinking about Metro, you're getting the full story. Follow my latest stories at WPLN.org.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. People detained by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement are now being sent to a former Tennessee prison in Tipton County. CoreCivic is one of the largest prison operators in the country. It was given a contract by the Mason Board of Aldermen despite a contentious public meeting last month when angry residents objected. Supporters say that nearly 240 new jobs would be created and about $325,000 would be gained in annual property taxes. CoreCivic has not indicated how many individuals are currently at the facility. A new report ranks Vanderbilt University in the top 10 for best colleges and universities when it comes to free speech. The ranking is done by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, known as FIRE. Previously, Vanderbilt ranked 140th. A major reason for the improvement is that students say they now feel more comfortable having open and honest conversations about controversial topics such as abortion, transgender rights, and the Israel-Palestine conflict. In contrast, Columbia University earned an F from its students. This comes amid growing concerns about threats to free speech and academic freedom at college campuses under the Trump administration. And the administration has penalized colleges, including Columbia, for what it considers a failure to address anti-Semitism. Well, here's a story that's out there. 2 Tennessee congressmen want to know more about a video recording of what appears to be a UFO. U.S. Representatives Andy Ogles and Tim Burchett asked a panel of experts this week about a never-before-seen video that was shown at a hearing. The video was recorded on October 24th last year, and it shows an object moving quickly off the coast of Yemen. A missile is fired, and it bounces off the moving object. Ogles is quoted saying, "It's clear from my experience and what I've seen, is there something out there? Is it ours? Is it someone else's? Or is it otherworldly?" Burchett asked the panel whether there are, quote, unidentified aerial phenomena operating without proper congressional oversight, end quote. When asked for more information, the hearing was closed to the public. A bill's been introduced that will protect people who share information about these sightings without fear of retaliation. More auto industry job cuts are happening in Spring Hill. Parts manufacturer Tenneco is laying off about 80 workers from its factory in Murray County. The Tennessean reports that's part of a larger workforce reduction, the company cutting about 350 jobs across the state. The news comes less than a week after General Motors indicated it will temporarily lay off about 700 employees at its auto assembly plant in Spring Hill. There's been a heartening trend in opioid overdose deaths nationwide, and Tennessee's no exception. Opioid overdoses had been rising for years, but the rate began a dramatic surge during the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, 2024 was the first year that deaths decreased. They went down by about 4% in Tennessee. Public health experts attribute the drop-off to harm reduction efforts, such as easy access to overdose reversal drugs. Crackdowns have made opioids, both prescribed and illegal, harder to get a hold of. But there is a downside. Dr. Joss Winkowski works for Cedar Recovery, an addiction treatment organization in Tennessee. He spoke with WPLN's This Is Nashville for the show's series on harm reduction.
For the first time, we've seen decreases in opioid death rates, but then the flip side has been an increase in stimulant-related overdose. If you can't get one, people go for the other. And so you see a lot more heart attacks and ER visits related to stimulants.
Stimulant overdose deaths doubled in Tennessee from 2019 to 2023, according to state data. More than a dozen water utilities in Tennessee have elevated levels of PFAS, or forever chemicals. That's according to data from the Environmental Protection Agency. The Tennessean reports one small town just outside of Chattanooga had levels 8 times the federal limit. PFAS are linked to various cancers. Reverse osmosis filters are one of the best ways to treat water inside homes and protect from dangerous pollution. Buses in Nashville will likely run more frequently this winter. WeGo has proposed several changes for transit service, like longer hours on Sunday, increased frequency, and expanded service hours on 7 routes. There would also be a new WeGo Link zone. WPLN's Metro reporter Cynthia Abrams says before the changes are implemented this winter, the agency is looking for feedback.
WeGo will soon open a public comment period for riders to voice their opinions about the changes. Virtual public meetings will be on September 17th and October 7th, with an in-person session at WeGo Central on September 23rd. These changes are funded by the dedicated tax the city's transit referendum established last year. They're just one small part of a 15-year plan to improve Nashville's public transit and infrastructure.
You can find the full list of proposed changes at wegotransit.com. The Americana Music Festival is underway here in Nashville this week, and included in the programming are events looking at the influential legacies of the Carolina Chocolate Drops and Rissy Palmer. Senior music writer Julie Height says that their careers have helped bolster a movement that she's been following closely.
Yesterday, Dom Flemons, a founding member of the Chocolate Drops, spoke on a panel about a new documentary on the string band.
It's kind of a mixture of 3 different backgrounds, 3 different approaches to music, but it works really, really, really well.
That film is one of several ways that the group's 28th anniversary has been celebrated this year. Back in April, the Chocolate Drops played a reunion show after a decade-long hiatus.
This is a movement, y'all. This is a movement.
But the original members, Rhiannon Giddens, Justin Robinson, and Flemons, view their legacy as bigger than them. Their reunion happened at a Black Roots festival created by Giddens called Biscuits and Banjos. And its lineup gathered Black folk musicians who inspired the Chocolate Drops and many more who were inspired by them. That included Brandy Waller-Pace, who also runs a Black Roots Festival in Fort Worth and just played Americana Fest. Reese Palmer, a leading artist and advocate on the country side of the scene, sang at Biscuits and Banjos too.
If we don't stand together, then we all fall down.
And she shared her spotlight with other Black artists, something she's made central to her mission in her own 2-decade career. Before both Palmer and the Chocolate Drops came on the scene, the Black voices in folk and country music seemed far more scattered and solitary, not to mention written out of the historical record. But thanks to their work welcoming their peers into community, a movement has grown. Julie Height, WPLN News.
Tune in at noon today to hear Julie dive deeper into the subject in a radio special created jointly by WPLN and WUNC. And you can catch an exploration of Reese Palmer's career tomorrow afternoon at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. As Nashville's population has ballooned, the housing stock hasn't kept up. Metro estimates the city will need to add 90,000 units by 2035, a good portion of which will need to be affordable. One way that some city leaders are looking to address the shortage is through zoning changes, allowing more homes to be built on a single lot. But in a story co-reported with the Nashville Banner, WPLN's Cynthia Abrams reports there's almost always pushback when projects are close to home.
In late June, dozens of neighbors from a small subdivision near Percy Priest Lake hopped on a Zoom to learn about a proposed development next door. It got heated.
You just want to maximize how much value you could get for the land. That's all it is. That's all it is. That's all we see.
They want to build, no matter what we're saying here.
No, we're not doing that.
The land in question is right now zoned for 25 to 30 homes. If the developer, Patrizio Murdaca, builds them, he says they'll be priced at around $600,000. That's over Nashville's median home price, and Murdaca worries it's too much.
Those $600,000 homes, just plain and simple, are going to bar certain, broadly speaking, certain age groups, certain demographics.
Murdaca is asking to upzone so that he can build more units, but at a lower cost. He's aiming for 64 townhomes at half the price. But the neighbors are staunch in their opposition to upzoning the land. Their concerns come down to their quality of life. They live just off the heavily trafficked Bell Road, but their neighborhood is small and quiet, with winding streets and brick houses. There's just one road in and one road out.
What they're proposing now is going to jam a bunch of cars at the worst possible time into an area that's already crowded.
That's Jim Grinstead, who's lived in the area since 2007. His neighbor, Shauna Creaky, agrees.
I think the overcrowdingness of the 64 townhomes in that tiny little space, it just seems cramped, like uncomfortable.
Creaky says she'd be okay with the current zoning, 20 or so new homes, while Grinstead says even that's too much.
Just because there's a demand doesn't mean we have to do everything, regardless how reckless it might be, to fill it. There are some times when we just have to say no.
But the neighborhood stance isn't the only factor. The district's council member, Russ Bradford, who is now nearing the end of his term, is open to breaking with constituents.
When I first ran in 2019, I was more of the mindset of, if the community does not want it, I won't move it forward. And so this time around, I'm still wanting to get that community input, but I'm also now looking at it from the lens of, we can't keep doing it this way. We've got to find a way to work between the two parties to get the housing built that we need.
Debates of this kind are playing out all across Nashville. People care about their homes, their neighborhoods, their way of life. If a new development is going to change the traffic flow or infringe on your backyard view, you might show up to a meeting and shout at the developer. It might get you the name NIMBY, or Not in My Backyard. That's in contrast to the YIMBYs, Yes in My Backyard, who feel strongly about increasing housing units to address the shortage.
Everybody has a right to a house.
The YIMBY thinking is much like Bradford's here.
We are getting to a point where land is so expensive, we can't keep building just individual homes. We've got to make the most of what we've got.
These debates have become urgent and common. Some council members briefly tried to increase density citywide. A major upzoning did pass this month for the Nations, and city planners have just introduced major zoning changes across Nashville. But back near Percy Priest, developer Murdoka is frustrated. He wants to create attainable housing. He points to his mom, a teacher, and the desire to see people with her income level afford a house. That goal may not be in the cards. Murdoka says he's not done with the property, but the neighbors are among the most antagonistic he's ever seen.
The most vocal, angry community members often rob themselves of the opportunity for true compromise and a true conversation because of how impossible those conversations end up becoming because of the level of vocal violence that happens.
If there's no compromise, neighbors would get what they want: the more expensive single-family homes. But for those wanting to add to the city's affordable housing stock, they'll have to look elsewhere. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
This story was co-reported with Stephen Elliott of the Nashville Banner. You can read an extended dive into development tensions at WPLN.org or at NashvilleBanner.com. We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. And thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one. And we'll catch back up next week.